I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are speaking with an author who has written a harrowing book about the buildup to both world wars and the gruesome true story of what truly happened in 1956. Karoly Owen's book, The Climb, tells the tragic tale of Hungary's downfall, a story that has been buried deep for too long. We are delighted to have Karoly join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Karoly, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
What inspired you to write this book? It's your heritage, right? You live
Yeah,
in
it's
England,
it,
but
it
you're
really the book really is just one man's vision. That was his life. My grandfather was really old, he got dementia and he was in the old people's home. And I used to go to college past where he was, so I used to call in all of the time, and I'd got the time for him. He was sort of grumpy old man when he got really old. He was really grumpy, but I still spent time with him. And then he started to open up to me, and he started to tell me about him and about his life. So I started to just take it all in mentally, and then I started taking notes. And over a period of about 18 months, he told me all of the facts that are in the book. And obviously, this was in the 90s, and it was at a time before the internet was out. So if you wanted to do research, you'd have to do it through books and go into the libraries and that. So I put it on the bit of a back burner really, because my career was just taking off. And then I got married, and then I just decided the one day that I was going to start doing it, and I put his story together, and I was absolutely amazed when I looked at what he told me, how it dovetailed perfectly into the history. And it's also explained things that people didn't know. I mean, comments that people have made to me on Amazon, they have said to me that thank you for writing the book because you've put the right the cross the T's and dot the I's. There's gaps, and it was such a harrowing time. And my grandfather was born into World War One, and his parents, my great grandfather was assassinated, um, because he was fighting against the Germans. And then when she found out, when his wife Sophia found out, she went into labour and gave birth to my grandfather, and she died giving birth to him. So the priest took him in, and the priest that had just been inaugurated, later on, everyone will know is Cardinal Minzenzi. Well, he was a priest, took my grandfather in the early part of the 19th century, and Cardinal Minzenzi looked after my grandfather. But the only problem is in the book, some of the criticisms I've had is that I haven't covered the childhood of him, but the book is his story, and he'd never told me about his childhood. And every time I pushed for it, he wouldn't tell me. All I know is he went into the church, he was placed into the community from the church. He then turned Protestant. He didn't agree with the religion, which upsets Cardinal Minzenzi, but they kept in touch. And then my grandfather went into the army because he knew that his parents had died in World War One. So he felt obliged to go into the army, and he went in very young. And from what I could gather, he became quite highly decorated. I think he was either a 2 or a 3-star general in the army. And he talked about President Horthy, but they use the word baraton, which means friend. But I think he was not only worked with President Horthy, he was friends with him.
Mhm.
And the way he's talking about these people, it was as if they were his friends as well as these colleagues that he worked with. And my grandfather built himself up, and he didn't like what was happening with, because the Germans, remember, with World War II, they were allies with the Germans at the start, and then things started to turn, and Hungary just in the end put their arms up and said, "Help!
Mm.
We're going." So the Russians stepped in, and yeah, the Russians stepped in to help, and then they ended up. The story was they took over in the end. World War II ended, and in that interim of the 10 years between World War II ending and 1956, there was the Soviet takeover, and obviously then on 1956 the rebellion was called. But my grandfather was a general, as I said, and he was working with the Germans, and he went, I don't know which one it was now, he did tell me, but he ended up going to one of the concentration camps, and he saw in his own eyes what was happening. I do explain it quite well in the book, actually, what he witnessed there. But the things that man must have seen and heard, and Horthy, the president, he committed suicide. It's just nobody could be trusted. Everybody kept changing sides with the Russians, and it all got really messy. And then he went to the concentration camp, and then when he came back into Hungary again, he went AWOL from the army, and he told his men that to go back to Budapest. He didn't want anything to do with it. And that's where some of his men stayed with him, and he went underground to form the resistance with him and a nodge. And some of the other men went back to Budapest. Went to go and join with the Red Army, and they had the stars on the uniform. And then when the rebellion got together for 1956 and they moved in, my grandfather was there with them when it all happened. I have got a photograph that are in the book. That's the only proof that I've got that he was actually there. Because there's a picture with him and when they freed the cardinal from prison, because Cardinal Minzensi, I don't know whether you know the history of him, but he was imprisoned for treason by the Russians. And one of the main things I wanted to do was to get him out of prison when the rebellion came in, and they obviously did. They got him. So then when he released and he was back out in the public, he sought refuge in the American embassy, and he stayed there right through the war. He was with the American embassy, and obviously because my grandmother was with my grandfather, she got to know Cardinal Minzensi, and she was keeping in touch with him. So she was in communication, but it wasn't done by normal post. They've got some kind of Vatican post or something that they use where if they want private letters to be delivered, they get delivered by hand. And because he was a cardinal, she could do this, and that's how she communicated. So she was telling him things about the rebellion. And when they moved in 56 and I got him free, it was a terrible time, and they were losing the war. There was fighting going on everywhere, and then all of a sudden there was this big explosion over the top of the bridge coming over into Pest, and it was the Americans. They stepped in, and I've since found out my grandmother was writing to the cardinal and telling him what they were doing, and he was writing to the president of America and telling him what was going on, and they needed help. The British didn't get involved because it was the time of the Suez Crisis. So that was more important that was going on over in the Suez Crisis. So the British didn't really step in till later on. They offered refuge, so a lot of refugees went to the UK, but also there was 200,000 people fled the country, and a lot of them went. I have got family that I know live in Los Angeles, but I've got no idea where they are because they got split up. So this book to me is my granddad's story, and that's what I want to make quite clear. There might be some people that have got different opinions of what truly happened, but this is his story. It's not a group of people, it's just his story, and I've just put it down and put it to paper. I feel like I've done that what he wanted to do now. I've got his story out, and it deserves to be told. There is quite a lot of storylines in the book that come on there, but every fact in the book is true and they did happen. The only thing that I've changed in the book is names because, as I said, we aren't in touch with anybody. So I've got absolutely no idea whether they're alive or not. They could still be alive. So I changed some of the names in the book, but everything else, the facts and everything, they all happened, and it really wasn't nice. It
Yeah.
really wasn't.
Yeah, it was a crazy time for sure. I think telling your grandfather's personal story is very, very powerful because if you tell the stories of a million people, it gets like a statistics
Yeah.
book. It really doesn't have the impact. But to tell one man's story and
Yeah.
what his life was like and what that struggle was like, I think is really impactful.
Yeah. And the fact that it was from birth, World War I, he was a product of he was there at World War I. So he's three wars at the end of the
Yeah,
day that he went through. And
exactly.
and the things that happened in the family, there was assassinations of other family members, but I've only found a few people that I've got I know are relatives over in Hungary because I've still got the family. So that's the other part I want to do from this is the bit for my grandmother because she didn't want to leave, and I want to get the point across that she wanted me to bring the family back together again, and I want to do that. I need to find these people and just I don't mean live in their pockets. It's just be in touch. Know that we've got family out there because I've got loads of family. So that is one of the things that I'm trying to do with this book is to reach out. And the other one is for people to read the book. And I mean read the book.
Hmm.
Then look up, open your eyes. It's happening again with
Exactly.
the Ukraine.
Yeah.
What's going on with the Ukraine now? It's exactly the same.
Right.
Yeah, but if you look at that one with the shoes,
Yes.
that's a powerful picture if you understand what's behind it. Most people look at that picture and they say, oh, it's a river, it's shoes, or oh, it might be Budapest. It looks like it, but no one actually looks at what it actually means. Those shoes are women and children that were shot into the river
Unbelievable. Yeah. It's
from
very impactful.
56. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I've just educated you now just by one picture. You look
Exactly.
at that picture now and you'll think, oh, dear me, but you wouldn't think anything of it before. And that's my point. That's what I'm trying to get across. It's
Right.
happening again and we
Exactly.
can't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Lessons from the past can teach
Yeah,
us much about our world today. It's an important book. The
yeah,
book is called The Climb. It is written by Karoly Owen, and it is the story of his grandfather during World War I, World War II, and looking at the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, which, obviously was a massacre for the Hungarian people, and untold numbers of people fled to safety, to other countries.
yeah,
And as Karoy points out, it's happening again today in Ukraine.
yeah.
Carl, thank you so much
Another,
for
just
joining us.
one more
Sure,
other point.
absolutely.
Yeah, there's one more other point I want to get across as well now. This book is really important for people to understand what's going on. And it's,
Mhm.
if you look at what's going on with the wars now, it's exactly the same. That's the
Mhm.
point I need to make. I've lost track of what I'm trying to say now.
No, I think you're saying it. You're saying that, what happened in 1956 is happening right now in 2023
Yeah,
with Vladimir Putin's forces going into Ukraine, and the country is being destroyed, innocents are being murdered
yeah,
and killed, and that impact is going to be here for
yeah.
generations.
I remember what I wanted to say now. It was
Sure.
to all of the people that fled the country. I know I've spoken to them. I get quite emotional when I talk about it because I've
Mm.
spoken to the refugees that are still alive. And to this day, they still feel that they're be traitors. Because if you remember, my grandfather was friends with Imre Nagy. He was his friend as well as the colleague with the revolution. And he was hung, drawn, and quartered
Mm.
for being a traitor. And that's why my grandfather, that destroyed him when they did that to him and not because he felt like a traitor. And what I want to say to everybody out there that's in America, anywhere over the world that ran, it was okay to run.
Yeah.
It really was. You've got children, you had families, you've got to look after yourself. Don't ever think that you were a traitor because you weren't.
Exactly. You've got to do what
Yeah,
you've got to do to survive
yeah,
and to keep, your family going, to keep your own life going. And I think your grandfather is a remarkable man. I think you're a remarkable man. I'm so happy you put down his story on
yeah.
paper so the world could enjoy. Carl, thank you so much for joining us here
No
today.
problem. Thank you. Thanks for having
Pleasure
me
is
on.
all mine. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.